and the reckoning of time. Allah created this in truth. He explains the signs in detail for people who know. And here we are very beautifully told how we use the moon and the sun to calculate time. And we know that the lunar calendar is a calendar which we follow. And when we see the moon, we know it's the beginning of the month. And we see the new moon, we know it's the beginning of the new month. And of course, we are all too careful to watch out for the moon at the end of Ramadan. So we say the practical application of this equilibrium, this balance, and this perfection.
Yusuf, you mentioned that verse, Surah 10, verse 5. There's another point I just want to pick up on that. I think it's quite an interesting point. Let me just repeat the verse that you just mentioned a few minutes ago, and that is that the reference is Surah 10, verse 5, where Allah is the one who made the sun a shining glory and the moon a light. Now, I just want to highlight another aspect of this verse, which is actually quite interesting. The Quran has very meticulously and very specifically chosen the words to describe the sun and the moon. Now, in the Arabic language, there are many words which can be used to describe light. But here in this surah that you quoted, Allah uses the word diya to refer to the sun and nur to refer to the moon. Nowhere in the entire Quran is the sun ever called nur or light. It is never described as light. That characteristic is specifically and exclusively kept for the moon, never the sun. Now the word diya, what does it mean? It means, to interpret it, there's various shades of meaning, but it means to be bright, to shine like fire. It implies an object which is a source of light. That is the interpretation to the word diya. And this is only referred to the sun, never to the moon. The moon is always referred to as light, nur, nothing else. Now, let me just give you some other references where Allah describes the sun and moon very, very specifically and very meticulously, describing one in this way and the other in the other way. In Surah 25, verse 61, Allah says, "Blessed is the one who placed the constellation in heaven and placed therein a lamp and a moon giving off light." Again in Surah 71, verse 16, we are told, "Did you see how Allah created 7 heavens, one above another, and made the moon a light therein, and the sun a lamp?" And finally, in Surah 78, verse 12, we are told, "We have built above you 7 strong heavens, and placed a blazing lamp." Now the word Allah uses here is siraj, which implies a torch, which is a source of light, or wahaj, which is a blazing lamp, both of which are sources of light. So to summarize, the Quran is always referred to as being a source of light, originator of light. And the moon, Allah always describes as light, nothing more. Let us look at it from a scientific point of view. How does the sun create light? We know that through a very intricate process of nuclear fusion, energy and light is given off from the sun by the process of converting hydrogen into helium. So this is how we know the sun is a source of light. And we know that the moon itself only reflects the light of the sun. It does not produce light of its own. It is not a source of light. It cannot create light of its own. It merely is a reflector of light. So this is a fact that has only recently been discovered. That is, that the moon does not produce light, it merely reflects light. It is one of the discoveries of the 19th, 20th century. But yet Allah has very clearly chosen His words when He described the sun as being a source of light and the moon merely as light. This in itself points to the fact that Allah is the divine author of the Quran, an accurate description which science has only merely discovered.
I think the other thing is that, the other important thing we must note is that we find throughout the Quran how careful the Quran is not to give any indication of the types of beliefs that are present at the time. the errors that were existing at the time in their concepts of the astronomical bodies and so on. We see how meticulously the Quran does not fall into this error, which shows that it was not in accordance to the thinking at the time of the revelation of the Quran, but the Quran was in truth relating what was absolutely true.
We have to turn to Surah 13, verse 2, where we are told, and I quote, "He has subjected the sun and moon to His law, each of which runs its course for a term appointed." Now there are many, many references in the Quran which refer to this fact that the sun and moon have been created for a specific purpose and they're going to run their course. The references, for those who are interested, I would very briefly give you all, and that is in Surah 31 verse 29, Surah 35 verse 13, Surah 39 verse 3, all of which point to one inescapable fact, and that is that the sun and the moon will eventually be destroyed. There is the certainty of the finality of the lifespan of the sun and moon. So it has been created for a specific purpose, and when that purpose is fulfilled, Allah tells us very clearly it is going to be destroyed. There is another very interesting point which Allah mentions, something which has only recently been discovered, and something only recently we have been able to understand and appreciate more correctly. It is a verse found in Surah 36 verse 38, where Allah talks about the moon, where Allah talks about the sun moving to its final destination, or the sun moving to its final resting place. Let me quote the verse to put into perspective. We are told, "The sun runs its course to a settled place. This is the decree of Allah Almighty, full of knowledge." Now this seemingly simple verse is actually quite fascinating, because here Allah is telling us that the sun is going on its course, is heading on its course to a settled place, to a specific spot, to a specific place. Now, it sounds very simple, but as we will find out later, that this fact that the sun is heading to a specific spot is a fact that has only recently been discovered. Let us analyze that verse, what Allah says. The Arabic word that is used is mustaqar. Now when one looks at the meaning of mustaqar, two meanings come to mind, both of which are equally applicable and understand and can be used in this verse. The first meaning of mustaqar is it means an exact spot or an exact place. So that verse which I quoted would run as follows. Allah says the sun runs its course to an exact place, to a specific place. So that implies that the sun is moving to its final resting place. Now the second meaning, mustaqar, also means an exact time. So the verse would mean that the sun runs its course according to a specific time, its specific lifespan. So this would mean that the sun has been given a limited lifespan. And I've mentioned this in Surah 13 verse 2, that it runs its course for a term appointed.
I think also in that same verse, another very interesting point is, we find that the word uses li mustaqarri, li. Now the word li in Arabic can have various shades of meaning. And in this context, it could either mean in or to. So also the further meaning is the sun runs its course to a settled place or in a settled place. So would also imply that it's going to a final resting place, its destination, or it could also imply that the sun is moving in its settled place. In other words, in its position, moving. In other words, implying rotation of the sun.
Yes, that is quite interesting. But be that as it may, the meaning, as we've mentioned, both of which, mustaqar, implies that the sun seems to be heading to a specific spot. Now we've discussed that the sun and moon are going to be destroyed, the fact that the sun is moving to its final resting place, and finally what is going to happen to the sun and moon. For this we looked at Surah 81 verse 1, where Allah says, "When the sun shall be folded up Again in Surah 75 verse 9, where Allah says, when the sun and moon are united. And finally, when Allah says, when the heaven is cleft asunder, and when the planets are dispersed. Now all these above verses point to the eventual destruction of the sun and moon. So let me very briefly summarize what Allah says regarding the evolution of the sun and moon. Number one, we learnt that the sun and moon have been created for a purpose according to a fixed law, and once this purpose has been served, they will be destroyed. Number two, the sun appears to be moving to a specific destination or place. Number three, the sun is moving or rotating on its axis. Number four, a time will come when the sun will be folded up or contracted. Number five, the sun and moon will be united. And number six, the planets are going to be dispersed. Now this is what Allah says is going to happen to the planets and the sun and moon, and the ultimate fate. What is a scientific explanation to these 6 points which I've just mentioned now?
Yeah, so let us see then what the Quran says. Let us compare it to what we know today. Very recently, it has been found that the sun is indeed moving. In fact, initially, man believed that the earth was stationary and the sun was the one that moved around the earth. Now this was later disproved, and in the time of Kepler, for example, the planetary motions were perfectly established. And we know people like Copernicus and so on who came up with the theories that actually it was not the earth that was stationary, but the sun that was stationary, and the earth rotated around the sun. Thus far they had got correct. As regard the movement of the sun, this was only discovered rather recently in the late 18th to 19th century. What they found is that the sun is moving towards an exact point whose position has been determined accurately and called the solar apex. The sun is moving together with the solar system at 12 miles every second. It is moving to a point in the constellation of Hercules, or Alpha Lyrae as it's known in astronomical terms. And this, as you said, was only discovered in the last few hundred years. This fact has been mentioned in the Quran 1400 years ago. Secondly, the movement of the sun has only recently been discovered that apart from the sun moving to a position where it's going to be its final destination place, where the sun will sort of be dead at this point, they find the sun also rotates on its own axis. And this rotation takes place every 25 hours. The sun is further known to travel around the nucleus of our galaxy, that is the nucleus of the Milky Way. And the sun travels a revolution around this nucleus which takes 250 million years. That is, for one revolution around the nucleus of our galaxy, the sun takes 250 million years. Now, as regards the final destiny of the sun, scientists say that the sun has been in existence for the past 4 to 5 billion years. Now, the sun is giving us energy by burning up its various gases, as we have mentioned. Now, the rate at which the fuel is being used up is 4 million tons per second. So the sun is losing 4 million tons every second that it has been burning. Now this is, astronomical, it's phenomenal. But when you consider the size of the sun, we realize why it has been in existence for so long.
But bear in mind, the sun is but a tiny star compared to some other stars in our galaxy. So, this is mind-boggling to even think.
Absolutely, what the other stars may be
the
like.
The size of the other stars.
Now we know if the star is burning fuel at this rate, obviously it can't go on forever. And scientists estimate at this rate of burning, it will take another 5 billion years and the sun will run out of fuel. At this point, they say, the sun will begin to swell and become a red giant. It will be so large that the planets will be engulfed, that is, including the earth and the moon. The sun will lose control over them, and then the earth and the planets will be vaporized. The temperature will increase to billions of degrees. There will be an increase in the gravity of the sun, and the sun will begin to contract or fold up, and then it will cool off and end off as a black dwarf star.
So that is what, from a scientific point of view, this is what Allah talks about the sun and moon being united when the sun swells up.
We'll compare that to what the Quran says. As we said, when it says the sun shall be folded up. Now this is a very beautiful description of the sun being folded up. If what scientists say is true, then we see that the sun expands, reaches a maximum state of expansion, and then gets folded up where it contracts and becomes a black dwarf. And this, is very beautifully also reflected in what we spoke of, the evolution of the universe, where the universe is expanded to a maximum and then it will be rolled up and folded up in like manner. This is quite interesting. And then we have mentioned also about the sun going to his destination place. We mentioned that this destination place is exactly computed by science, and they know exactly where this point is going to be. The movement of the sun, of course, we have already discussed. The sun being folded up, we have just mentioned. The sun and moon being united, there we said.
The sun swells up.
With the sun swelling up,
Swelling up.
the earth and the moon will run into the sun, and they
swollen.
will ultimately be taken into its orbit because of its gravitational attraction. And the dispersing of the planets, of course, because of this upset in the force.
It's perfect correlation.
Absolutely, and it is so beautiful. But we must realize that this scenario that is provided by science talks about event that's going to take a long period of time. And of course, in the Quran, we see that this necessarily may not be so, that this could be a catastrophic event which can occur at any point in time. This is also tenable from science. If we consider the motion of the sun itself that is moving towards a specific point, we don't know what course it is taking. We don't know what stars it may encounter on its way. There could be a point in which there may be a collision, and this would ultimately result in the destruction of the sun. So therefore, we do not know, but one thing we know for sure is that the sun has a limited lifespan. Be it catastrophic or be it a natural cause of events over time, it will ultimately be destroyed. So this very beautifully illustrates to us what is going to happen to the stars and the sun as a whole. I think we can go on to discuss now another very interesting revelation, the surah, verse in the Quran.
And that the reference here, I think it's a very interesting statement which Allah mentions in Surah 2 verse 22, where Allah says, "Who made the earth your cradle and the heavens your canopy or roof, and sent down rain from the heaven." Now here Allah talks about the heavens or roof being created as a source of protection for man. We know a roof provides protection. More specifically in Surah 21 verse 32, Allah says, "And we have made the heavens as a canopy well guarded, yet do they turn away from the signs which these things point to." Again, in Surah 41 verse 12 we are told, "And we adorned the nearer heaven with lights, and provided them therein guards." Again, in Surah 37 verse 1 to 7, and Surah 67 verse 5. Now, in these verses which I've read out, Allah talks about a protective canopy being made for us. Allah talks about guards that Allah has provided in the heavens for us to protect us. What exactly are those guards that are being referred to here, that Allah has provided in the heavens? The guards is protecting us on earth.
This is interesting that where the Quran mentions specifically that the heavens is a protection, and the guards that are present in the heavens. And this was not understood, when the time of the Quran was revealed, and for many years thereafter, as to what these guards are referred to. Now if we study the earth and the surrounding atmosphere, we come to understand what these guards are. I must make a point that when Allah refers to the heavens, of course it refers to anything extending from the earth's surface to the entire cosmos. Because we know, for example, Allah says, Allah sends down rain from the heavens. So this is a reference to even the atmosphere of the earth as we understand it. If we study the atmosphere around us, we find that it consists of various layers. We have first the troposphere, which is 7 miles from the earth's surface, and this is the area of the clouds and weather as we know it. Then we have the stratosphere, which is 17 miles from the earth. The chemosphere, 45 miles, and this is the ozone layer as we know it. Then we go further from the earth, we get the ionosphere, which is 200 to 250 miles from the earth's surface. And finally, the exosphere, which is about 1,000 miles extending from the Earth's surface. So this is basically the Earth's atmosphere as we know it. Now the gods that are referred to in the Quran are the various factors involved in the protection of life on Earth. And these are distributed in these various layers of the Earth's atmosphere. And we will see these various gods in the various atmosphere. First of all, the ionosphere and chemosphere. This is the first line of defense. Now in this layer, we find there are gods, for example, ozone and carbon dioxide that are present in abundant quantities in this layer. These protect against the harmful effects of high energy radiation of the sun. Now this high energy radiation of the sun is destructive to life on this earth. And this layer does not allow these rays to penetrate. They act as filters for these high energy destructive rays. Secondly, we get the primary cosmic rays, which result from atomic nuclei collisions that arise from far beyond our solar system. And these cosmic rays are very harmful to life on this earth. And we find that this layer acts as a filter to prevent these primary cosmic rays from entering onto the Earth's surface. And they are converted to harmless secondary rays. Also, we find that this layer, meteors which come into the Earth's atmosphere are destroyed here as a result of the friction of the atmosphere. And this is commonly referred to as the shooting stars. The next line of defense is a troposphere. Now this second line of defense acts as a protective insulation against excessive rise and fall in temperature. That is, they prevent the temperature of the earth becoming too high or too low. That is, when the sun shines, it prevents it getting too hot, and at night it prevents it from getting too cold. And we appreciate this when we look at the moon, which does not have any atmosphere. Now on the moon's surface, during the day, the temperatures go up to 100 degrees. Can you imagine? That's boiling point. And during the night, it goes to minus 180 degrees. So we can see that life will not be possible, under these circumstances.
Because it's lacking the atmosphere which we have, basically.
Simply the atmosphere which serves this purpose of being guards. And so beautifully explains how it guards life on this earth. Because of this guard. Had these guards not been present, life on this earth would not be possible. So we see that Allah refers to these guards and wants us to reflect, to ponder and study what is the importance of this.
An interesting point. Scientists estimate, this is just an estimate of course, that on a daily basis we are bombarded with close on to 30 million asteroids. Very obviously they are small in size, but none of which really ever fall down to Earth to produce any kind of harm. If there was no atmosphere, imagine what would have happened to us.
Absolutely beautiful. And it just shows, when Allah says, we have made the heaven as a protected canopy, it really is protected. And this is just the majesty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But more interestingly, it points to, nobody could have understood this at the time of the revelation of the Quran. Nobody could have known about this during the time of the revelation of the Quran, which again points to the fact that the Quran is a divine revelation. So with this few words then, we thank you for joining us, and inshallah invite you back again next week to join us on the footprints of the Creator.
Jazakallah and Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.